Hey everybody, so I haven't done an Enforcer Hall of Fame video in quite a while, so I think it's time to induct the next fighter into the Enforcer Hall of Fame. And today it is legendary St. Louis Blue and Quebec Nordique, Tony Twist, going into my Enforcer Hall of Fame. So Tony Twist played 10 years in the NHL, but he only played 445 games, so he definitely has less games played than some of the other guys on this in this Hall of Fame, and with less games played comes less fights. So he certainly isn't at the fight level of, say, a Ty Domi or Bob Probert were, but when Tony Twist was in the lineup, he was one of the most feared men in the NHL. He had one of the best right hands, and I mean rock hard puncher, just absolute rock hard puncher. He could KO guys and really put a beat down on guys throughout the league. And Tony Twist, you didn't see him, getting in cupcake fights against non-fighters too often. When this guy fought, it was usually against the other team's top fighter. And he certainly threw down against some of the best heavyweights of the 90s in the NHL. So 445 career games. He only had 10 goals and 18 assists in his career for 28 points. So obviously he was not there for his offense. However, in less than 500 games, he still had over 1,100 penalty minutes. 1,121 to be exact. So he was getting, a lot of penalty minutes in a very limited amount of games played. He had 105 career fights in the NHL. That's obviously less than some of the other people in this, on this list, but he played less games than a lot of those guys. 105 fights in under 500 games. You're fighting, more frequently than every fifth game. That is he fought like 1 out of every 4 games based on the numbers versus his games played. So very active fighter, very frequent fighter, and somebody who really got in a lot of well-known legendary fights in really only a decade of time. So the most fights Twist ever had in a season came in 1991-92 with the Quebec Nordiques, where he had 16 fights. So he never crossed the 20-fight mark in a season. That's because he never really played more than 60 or so games in a season. He wasn't in the lineup on an every single night basis to the point where he was playing 80 games a year. He generally played 50 or 60 games a year. His best offensive season came in 1995-96 with the St. Louis Blues, but by best offensive season, take that for what it's worth, because that's 5 points. He had 3 goals and 2 assists that year. So he was definitely not a goal scorer and not somebody who was going to give you much offensively. He was in the lineup to fight, and that's what he did. He played 10 seasons in the NHL. 8 of those 10 years, he went over the 100 penalty minute mark. So he knew his role, and he did it very well. And his career was split between 2 places. He came into the NHL with the St. Louis Blues in 1989-90 and only played, I believe it was 28 games for them that year. He then went to Quebec for a number of seasons from 1990 to 94 and was had his most fights in a year with Quebec and had some good years with the Nordiques. And then he came back for the 1994-95 season to St. Louis and ended up finishing his career where it began with the St. Louis Blues, and played from 94 to 99 with them, and then retired from the NHL. So most people, I think when most people think of Tony Twist, they think of the St. Louis Blues, but he did have some very good years with Quebec as well. But I know that when you say the name Tony Twist, the first team that pops into my mind is the St. Louis Blues. But I don't think his years in Quebec should be forgotten about either, because they were good years for him and big years fight-wise for him. So, like I said, Twist was, he wasn't in the league all that long, especially compared to some other guys, but he was a very, very respected fighter, a very hard puncher, a guy with rock solid hands, and somebody who could put a beat down on almost anybody, and somebody who wasn't afraid to fight anybody. He would go against some of the toughest guys in the league, and he had no problem doing it. So Tony Twist, despite the lack of games played, still absolutely was one of the best enforcers of the NHL in the 90s, and a very well-respected guy, a very well-liked guy, and a great, great fighter. So Tony Twist, you are now inducted into my Enforcer Hall of Fame, a 90s legend when it comes to enforcing in the NHL. So with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media, check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.